Again, Carrick, it looks like you got almost 60 folks here. I'm going to get ready to turn it over to you. We're fortunate today to have one of our two social scientists, Carrick Robinson. You should be seeing his screen, and he's going to talk about a balance of craft and best available science, important considerations for survey research. And there's a huge element of our agency that's involved in survey research directly or indirectly. And, dealing with the public and our constituents is one of the most important things we do. So I certainly think Carrick's topic has application across the agency for everybody, and I look forward to hearing what you got to say. And so with that, Carrick, I'll let you have it.
All right, thanks, David. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. Let me just get set up with this laser pointer thing real quick. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's presentation is about craft and science and how we can think about those things when designing and implementing survey research. You can kind of think about this as one talk that could be one of many, probably for like an introductory social science survey research class, for example. I'm just really scratching the surface, talking about a couple topics that are really important to survey research. I'm one of the two social scientists, the other one being Chris Bova. We're here as resources to help with survey research and to implement surveys ourselves. And so that was kind of the premise of this talk. I'm going to go through some examples that for some work that we've done. But we're always here to help you and ask questions. So let's get started. First, I kind of want to frame science and research, right? Because survey research in our agency is science, and it's a research method. So these are two Oxford English dictionaries of the definitions of science and research. Science being the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the world through observation and experiment. And in science, we often use research to answer our questions, which is the systematic investigation into and study of materials and sources to establish facts and reach conclusions about the world. So scientific research is part of this systemic idea. And by systemic, I mean it's part of a system that's been developed for decades and even millennia in some cases. So we're really using well-established methods and thought processes and building upon them and making them better. So in the natural resource field, science is often thought of as the best available science. And in our strategic plan, under goal 3 of conserving and enhancing fish and wildlife in North Carolina, the second strategic objective is to emphasize best available science in our programs. And we're not legislatively mandated to use best available science based on my view of the law and looking at the law. However, when we're working on programs such as the Endangered Species Act or the Magnuson-Stevens Act, we are required to use the best available science. And it is encouraged in our strategic plan to do so. But this idea of best available science is usually viewed from the physical science lens. When it was created and developed, physical scientists created the definitions and the meanings of best available science. But in social science, when we're thinking about understanding very complex things like people's thoughts, their attitudes, or their behaviors and motivations associated with those, they often don't fit into some set philosophical set of what science is. And so what's been proposed is using this idea of best available social science. And this has been developed by Charlie et al. In 2017 in a paper they used. And in general, we want to use the best research design and methods, using the most appropriate analysis and interpretation of data for the research question or the policy, and then drawing the appropriate conclusions and representation of the data for the research question or policy question. And these are universal for physical sciences as well, but the paper outlines more nuanced thoughts and definitions associated with social science. And by having this framework for best available social science, we can create better, more equitable, and more defensible management decisions and policies. So I just kind of wanted to frame the idea of survey research around this idea of best available social science. And today we'll be focusing on research design and methods and how that will impact the appropriate conclusions and representations of the data. So jumping in, right, what is a survey? Today we're talking about surveys that collect information about people. We're not talking about engineering surveys or biological surveys. This is where we're talking to people and people are giving us information about themselves. And a survey is a very broad methodology. It is composed of a questionnaire, or that set of questions that we spent hours and hours and hours developing. And then once people respond and give us their information, it's part of the data. And then the analysis and conclusions that we draw from the questionnaire data these are all part of what a survey is. And when we're thinking about a questionnaire or those series of questions, they can be presented in multiple ways, such as a phone survey, when someone for the polling office is calling you to understand who you're going to vote for in November, or something like that. And then there's these intercept surveys where if we want to understand people who might be using one game land, we might go to a trailhead or a parking lot and talk to people face to face. And in those cases, we're asking people and we're recording their responses. But today, we're going to be focusing on self-administered surveys, which are probably the most common. This is where you're responding to it online or on paper. You're filling out the questionnaire and providing your responses. And there's lots of benefits to these surveys. Because of the way they're designed, we can generalize about a population, which is the big topic today. We can say something about all the anglers in North Carolina. And surveys, we can quantify complex concepts like attitudes and values and turn them into numbers and do cool data analysis with them. And then we can reach a widespread population. For example, a lot of hunters and anglers come from surrounding states to hunt and fish in North Carolina. And with surveys, we can talk to all those folks and gather all their perspectives. And additionally, surveys provide some level of anonymity. So when you're filling out a survey yourself at your house, no one's looking over your shoulder, you're not talking to anyone, so you're more likely to provide accurate responses than if you were doing a face-to-face survey, and you might give the survey person a something they want to hear. So this level of anonymity provides us with some better data quality more often. So, like David said, surveys are really important to the commission. In 2019, the WRC distributed about 41 surveys to constituents. And these were of a wide variety. They were educational surveys to look at how well programs were working, talking to hunters, see what they killed, etc. And Chris and I were only responsible for maybe 2 or 3 of these surveys that we designed ourselves. And we reached, last year, we probably reached over 1 million people just contacting them. And we probably reached more people more than once. A trout angler also might be a duck hunter, right? So those people get lots of surveys from us. So it's a way that we can engage with our constituents on a broad scale. And then even this year, in 2020, we distributed one survey to over 3 million people, which is a lot of information and a lot of contact with our constituents. And so we use them for a wide variety of purposes, and we use them a lot. Again, part of the premise of this presentation. So now that we kind of know what a survey is and what a questionnaire is, I'm going to run through some important definitions to keep in mind for the rest of this presentation today. The first is a population. And this is in a triangle shape because generally the number of people is going to get smaller as you go down the list. So a population is the true number of people of interest. And it's usually those people that you're trying to make conclusions about. So take, for example, North Carolina's coastal anglers. Let's say there's 500,000 coastal anglers. And then a sample frame is this list of individuals from the population who we can sample. Oftentimes in our studies, we use licensed database contact information. So for the case of coastal anglers, we might use the licensed database of anglers who have a coastal recreational fishing license, and they have a valid email. We have some way to contact them. And that narrows the total number of people down to 300,000. And these numbers are just made up. There might be more, there might be less. So from our sample frame, we take a sample. And this is the group of people who are selected to participate in the survey. So we're not going to, most often, we're not going to sample all 300,000 coastal anglers from our sample frame, but say we might take 10,000 of them who have the CRUFL privileges. And then there's going to be the people who take the survey and respond to it, and that might be 2,000 anglers with CRUFL privileges. So population, sample frame, sample, and respondents are 4 terms that I'm going to be using, and they're helpful definitions to know when you're designing and thinking about survey research. So in the social sciences, we think about validity and reliability, and these are almost synonyms to the physical sciences use of precision and accuracy, and this figure with the targets might be familiar to some of you here. But in the social sciences, precision is thought of as reliability. It's about consistency. If somebody did a study and then someone else did it a year later, will they get consistent and similar results? And then accuracy is thought of as validity. It's basically, are we measuring what we want to measure? And validity and reliability are 2 umbrella terms. There's like 7 types of validity in the social sciences and about 4 types of reliability. But for today, we're going to be focusing on validity only, and one specific type, which is external validity. And this can be thought of as the generalizability of survey research. So can we apply findings outside of the study context? Or in other words, can we really say something about that full population of interests? And I chose this because it's one of the most foundational ideas of validity in survey research. It's a big deal. It's often talked about a lot, and it's kind of not discussed enough within our agency. And so I wanted to present you with some ideas and some thoughts about it and how we can address it. So an example of external validity would be, say you have a sample of anglers in North Carolina. Can we really say something about all of the anglers in North Carolina based on our sample? And that's what I'm going to be talking more about in more detail. So now that we know some threats, some ideas about validity, well, now that we know some ideas about validity, let's talk about some threats to it. And, you know, every day we're kind of bombarded by surveys. We go get a Big Mac and McDonald's wants us to take a survey to get another free one, tell us how they did. You know, you might be phone called about polling. And then also within our agency, we send out a lot of surveys to a lot of people, multiple who've probably received more than one from us in a given year. And this leads to the idea of survey fatigue. So this is an issue because we have limited cognitive energy. If our cognitive battery is low, we're going to be confused. We're not going to pay attention. We're not going to be motivated even to take the survey. And this can happen within a survey or between surveys. So if the survey is really long, as we go farther and farther into it, we might start paying less attention, and this can lead to bad data. This is also the case across surveys where, oh, I took a survey yesterday, I don't want to take this one today, for example. And this idea of survey fatigue isn't, it doesn't apply when it doesn't apply when we care about a subject, when we're passionate about something. When we really want people to know our thoughts, to know our opinions. We're more motivated to take the survey and participate. So survey fatigue is an issue because it can lead to this idea of non-response bias or non-response error. And like in the previous example with survey fatigue, when people are passionate and they're more likely to respond, those less passionate people who we still want to hear from and have valuable perspectives, they're less likely to respond. So when we have more passionate people than less passionate people, we're going to have a significant number of people in the survey who don't respond, and they're going to be different from those that do respond. And that's going to be important to our findings. So we can make incorrect conclusions about a population with the idea of non-responsive bias. And this doesn't occur randomly. It happens for a reason. People are motivated, they get tired, maybe they don't have an email, so we can't contact them. And non-response bias and survey fatigue threaten the external validity and threaten the generalizability of our findings. So this means that if this is an example where we have 1 million anglers in our population, and we send out a survey to all of them, and only 10,000 respond. You know, we're super excited. We got lots of data. We have really high statistical power. However, that's only a 1% response rate. So if we look at this pie graph here, we're only capturing that orange sliver, and we're missing out on all the rest of the pie. So this is essentially, this is saying is a large sample isn't necessarily a good sample. Lots of data does not mean you have strong external validity. And this idea of a response rate being bad is a potential signal of non-response issues. But a caveat here is that it's only one indicator of survey validity. Like I said, there are 7 different ones, but this is only one way that we assess whether a survey is valid or not. And we can address threats to external validity by kind of taking 3 steps. First, we want to think about who we sample. We want to think about random sampling. And then we want to think about who can take the survey. So the first step, think about who you sample. We want to think about sampling error. How well are you sampling who you want to sample? And is there coverage error? Is there a discrepancy between the sample and the true population? So for example, this is a imaginary figure of anglers in North Carolina, and a different color represents maybe a different attitude. So if we have this true population, but our sample is only composed of anglers who have these blue perspectives, we're not really capturing a representative sample. And to do so is often more expensive. Maybe to expand our sampling techniques to get the orangish colored anglers' perspectives is going to cost more money. So let's walk through an example with duck hunters. And these numbers are actually real. We estimated that there's about 70,000 duck hunters in North Carolina, and we used HIP certifications, the annual certification that is required by the federal government for you to duck hunt. But within those 70,000 in our license database, only 44,000 of those have emails with us. So if we decide to take to use email surveys where we're only sending surveys to duck hunters with emails, we're going to lose 38% of the population. So can we really make conclusions about duck hunters when we're losing 38% of the population in our sampling techniques? You can make conclusions about duck hunters, but first you need to show that those with emails are different or are the same as those with emails. And this takes more time to do, but it's really important in order if you want to say something about the true duck hunting population in general. So let's take this again, where we have 70,000 duck hunters, but the federal government requires addresses for HIP certified hunters because they send surveys as well every year to duck hunters. But we decide to mail surveys. We're able to capture the whole population of duck hunters, but it's going to cost us thousands and thousands of dollars more. Paper surveys are not cheap. Mailing is not cheap. And most often you send people more than one survey. You contact them multiple times. So that's going to really add up. And then once you decide how you're going to sample and if it covers, if you minimize coverage error, you want to think about random sampling. So this is a biological example from a study within our agency done last year, where the biologists created a figure of growth rates for striped bass in Lake Hickory and Lake Rhodus. So do you think that the biologists, in order to make this generalization about the growth rates of those fish in the lake, do you think they sampled every fish? Unlikely, because it's impossible. So the same principle applies to the social sciences, where we don't need to sample every single person to draw appropriate conclusions, but we need to sample in a responsible way to maintain external validity, to be able to say something about that population. So the big take-home message about random sampling is that it's better to sample a few people very well than get biased results with a large sample size. So in random sampling, each person has an equal chance of being surveyed. And this is an unbiased representation of the entire population because it's random. And one benefit is that this could reduce survey fatigue of our avid and valuable Fish and Wildlife Associated recreationists, because we're cutting down on the number of surveys we send them. So last year, we wanted to understand trout anglers' attitudes towards removing the wild natural bait, public mountain trout water, and all those would churn into wild waters. Essentially, you can no longer fish with worms or crickets in wild waters. And so we took our random sampling one step further. We did proportional random sampling, where my laser pointer's not moving. Basically, we did, from previous research, we know that most of our trout anglers live in districts 7, 8, and 9, which makes sense because that's where most of the trout waters are. And a lot of them also live out of state. So what we did was we broke our sample frame into groups based on the district in which the person resided. And then we randomly sampled within each district. And this is a representation of each district, where each person within each district has the same chance of participating. And so when you have an unbiased representation of each district, we have an unbiased representation of the entire state. And this is kind of what it ended up looking like, where we sent most of our surveys to district 7, 8, and 9 in the mountain region, but then the coastal folks, they didn't get as many because they're farther from the mountains, less likely to trout fish. And this is just one way to do random sampling. There's lots of different ways. You don't need to break it up by proportions. You can just do one random sample. Sometimes you might want to get a perspective from somebody and randomly sample based on that. It truly depends on the research question and the policy goal. So once you consider random sampling, you want to think about who can take the survey. And this slide has some text on it, but it's actually really, really simple. You know, when we're thinking about who can take the survey, there's this option for an open survey. And we use Qualtrics because we have a contract with them. They're an online survey company. And basically, with an open survey, anybody can take the survey, but they can only take it once. And this is essentially a generic link where you can share it with all your friends. You can share it with people who have the same perspectives of you because you want to make sure that that voice is heard. And this is essentially called ballot box stuffing, where we can send things out to people to basically stuff the ballot box with these perspectives that we want to be weighted more heavily. And one pitfall of this is that it doesn't limit non-response bias, because these passionate folks are going to respond, while those uninterested folks are going to be less likely to respond. And this can create some non-response bias and error and threatens our external validity. However, we always have the option to create a unique survey, which is basically the simplest form of a survey. It's an online version of a paper survey. When you have a paper survey, you can only fill it out once. You can't give it to your friends to go over your checkboxes. It's only for one person. You can't share it. And so we have the capability to do this online. And this can reduce that response bias of ballot box stuffing because you can't share it with people who have the same perspectives as you. But it doesn't entirely limit non-response bias because those passionate folks are still more likely to respond. But they can't stuff the ballot box with more of their perspective. So it's more of a representative sample. And it can reduce the non-response bias. So when I did this trout study to understand basically trout anglers' perspectives of not being able to use worms in wild waters anymore, I was able to compare a random survey that had a unique survey link where a person could only use it once and not share it, to a non-random open survey, which is the generic link, spread through emails. I sent emails of the generic link to folks from the random sample who asked me, hey, I want to share this with my friends. So I sent them that link, and I also posted it on some Facebook groups so it can be distributed, and anybody could take it, whoever saw it, right? So I was able to compare these two. And this is a figure, two figures. On the left is some scalar questions about how acceptable is removing the wild natural bait water classifications. And then on the right is how much you support or oppose it. So it's kind of a multiple measure of a similar idea. And then the blue bars are that random unique sample, the people who I selected the district they lived in, and then I randomly selected within that. And then the red bars are the non-random open link generic survey that could be sent to anybody, anybody could take it. And what you can see here is a kind of some stark differences. Basically what these differences represent is some bias in that people who participated in the open survey, the non-random survey, were more likely to have acceptable and supportive opinions of removing wild natural bait waters. And those random people were less so. And so there's also a discrepancy in the neutral feelings where the random sample was more neutral than the non-random sample. And so it was kind of cool to look at this, to look at the impact of how I sampled and the different results that came out of it. We might draw similar conclusions based on how we sample, and this is a good illustration of it. And I went a little step farther to understand, why was this happening? And, when I was looking at the data, I saw that people who were members of special interest groups were more acceptable and more supportive of this change. So, okay, is there a difference between the number of people from those groups? And the answer is yes. There was significantly more Trout Unlimited members. 63% of the random sample was Trout Unlimited members. And this goes back to the idea of motivation, is that those folks were able to take that survey link and send it to their chapters. And I know that happened. And so there's nothing inherently wrong with this. Everyone wants their voices to be heard. There's nothing wrong with Trout Unlimited, but by controlling for, by using random sampling and controlling for who we can take the survey, we can get a more representative sample, somewhere around like 18% of the trout anglers from the random sample were Trout Unlimited members. And so this is just another illustration of the bias that exists that happens depending on how you survey or not. So just to kind of wrap things up and recover, the first thing when thinking about doing a survey project is to identify the need. Do you actually need to do a survey? Generally, it's a very easy way out, but Chris and I can help identify whether it is the most appropriate method. There's a lot of ways to answer questions in the social sciences. And say, if you do need to do a survey, think about who you sample, who you need to sample in order to get a representative proportion to make a conclusion about the population. Are you able to reach everyone that you need to reach? And then do you have the resources to sample that population well. Oftentimes in our agency, we have incomplete sample frames. Our license database doesn't have an email or an address for everyone. So sometimes we have to get creative in how we reach those folks. And doing so is often very expensive and might not be in the budget for the project. So we have to make trade-offs when we're thinking about sampling and external validity. If the project's rushed, we might not have enough resources to do it well. Good sampling is often very expensive. And then how important is it to draw a representative sample and have strong external validity to the policy or research question? So those are three major things that we need to think about when sampling. And then can you really say what you want to say based on the people who responded? Do you have strong external validity enough to say that, yes, all the anglers in North Carolina feel this way? And when you do that, you have to trust the science and be transparent about what you did. The idea of external validity or generalization isn't discussed enough. And I think it should be, because it makes us more trustworthy. It makes us more reliable to just say what we did. And if what we did is good enough to say something true about a population. So that's kind of all I wanted to cover. Again, it's just one topic of multiple in designing good survey research. But I'm really looking forward to answering your questions and helping everyone out in the future. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Carrick. If anybody has any questions, put them in the chat box. We're going to work through those. I'm not seeing any yet, so I'm going to start you off with one. You hit on this a little bit, this issue of random sampling, and it's a big deal in social science and what I would guess just call natural sciences. So when, in your view, underneath the umbrella of what you call the best available social science, is it actually acceptable not to randomly sample?
Yeah, you still hear me, right?
Say that again.
You can still hear me, right?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, so that's a good question. A good example is actually in a survey that we're doing either very, very soon, where we're surveying the people who are members of the North Carolina Prescribed Fire Council to kind of draw conclusions about the prescribed fire practitioners around the state. And basically the sample there is small enough where we are able to sample everybody. I'm not sure of like the true population size, but in that case, we're able to contact everyone and get a good response to understand trends across the state. So it's kind of, if the population is small enough, you can do it. And then I think I did a survey for the Wink magazine, and it was easy enough to sample everybody just by putting an insert in everybody's magazine. So there are cases where it's certainly feasible.
Okay. Next question. How do you select your sample? What tool do you use?
So we have this population, right? We have this broad population of people we want to understand. We have a sample frame, which is the list of all the people we want to sample. And then there's lots of complex processes that go into selecting the actual sample itself, the people who will participate. One of them is this idea of a rate of bad information. So generally in our license database, 20% of the emails addresses will be bad, they'll get bounced. So that's kind of one assumption we assume. And then there's also this idea of statistical power that we need. And generally, if you want to have good statistical power for a very large population, you need about 1,200 responses. So, and then we need to think about the estimated response rate. If we send out 10,000 surveys, how many are we going to get back? What's that response rate? And so looking at previous research, maybe with a similar population, you have to assume some level of response rate in order to calculate your sample. So that those are three major things that we consider when determining who to sample.
All right. Let's see. I'm just going to go down the list here. You've actually got quite a few. What's the best way to find out the survey data that the Wildlife Commission has on hand to date?
I don't know that. I imagine IT might have something to do with that, like we're looking at the PAWS old reports. But the deal with us is our survey research is spread across divisions. All divisions use it, and so there's no one place where it is conglomerated. So you might need to look across PAWS for all the different division stuff to find it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that may be a good way to move forward is to try to get that stuff more centralized because certainly I know we've been doing surveys for over 20 years. So looking into divisions is a good place. Let's see, what are the go-to options if a survey is not done?
If there's an alternative method, I assume.
Yes.
Yeah. So and oftentimes in um, the social sciences, we don't always need to do a survey. Like I said, it's very helpful if we want to be able to say something about a large population. Um, but if we don't have any idea about what people think, oftentimes a very good step is doing a more what we call like a qualitative research method. So one that's not necessarily getting numbers and getting large sample sizes. It's just going out and talking to people to understand their perspectives first. And so the benefit to doing something before you jump right into a big survey is to understand how people think about an issue initially. And when you use these interviews or something first, it helps you create a better survey because you're using the interested population's perspectives in designing the survey. You're not just designing it out of thin air. And a lot of times we can even just do some lit reviews, just looking at the large science library to understand a question. You might not even need to collect data. So there's lots of different options.
Okay. A series of questions within a question. What are your thoughts about the length of time allowed to respond? Is there a sweet spot where I can expect to get the most responses? Is there a length of time that I should expect diminishing return for responses? And should this be taken into account when analyzing the data from responses? And that was all from the same person.
Right. That's a great question. Um, you know, usually I get like for the trout study, for example, I think I sent 4 different points of contact to like, hey, take the survey. Hey, remember I sent you a survey. Hey, remember I sent you a survey. Hey, this is your final reminder to take the survey. And basically, it just peaks the day I sent this. I sent it, and then it um, just kind of drops off after that. Maybe the next day there's about half, but it's kind of like this 2-day period where you're really getting the majority of responses, and it really shows the importance of the multiple contacts, right? So you're going to bolster your response rate by contacting people more, which also adds to kind of the cost depending on how you do it. And so one interesting thing you can do with that is that you can look at those people who responded later and those people who responded first and see if they're different, because those people who responded later are more likely to be than those people who did not respond at all. So you can kind of use them as a proxy to check for non-response bias. And that's something really interesting you can do. Did I capture all of the questions there?
Yeah, I think you did. I think you did. Okay, acknowledging that doing a full-blown survey takes a lot of time and effort on your and Chris's part. How acceptable is it to reach out and ask you to vet smaller surveys to get advice on making them reliable and valid? I.e., we do the work of writing up the survey questions, administering it, and analyzing the results, but get your blessing on the survey that goes out. Example, a brief survey after a workshop to get input from that workshop's participants.
Yeah, that's a pretty common thing that Chris and I do, and we encourage it because we want to kind of understand everything that's going out there. Like I said, our agency did 41 surveys last year, and Chris and I are really responsible for 2 or 3. And so it's really nice to understand the information that we're collecting, because we can use that to kind of blend it with other ideas. We can combine things um, and streamline the process more. So it's a great first step.
All right, great. Let's see. Thanks, Carrick. Great presentation. Are there efforts for the Wildlife Commission to expand our capacity to pull more random samples of the general population? Or is this really only feasible to contract out? And then parenthetically, would building this capacity lower the cost of a survey?
So I mean we don't need to um, contract out things like that. Sometimes we might have too much on our plate, or it might be the best option. But we can purchase random samples of the general population from specific companies that own that information. So it depends on the question and who's in charge and the budget. And as far as if we're expanding our capacity to be able to do that, I'm not sure. That might be a good question for the research committee.
Yeah, that was a good pass. I'm writing notes as we go. Okay, well, good. That's all the questions we have in the chat box. So I want to again thank you, Carrick, for giving this webinar. I think it went really well. Lots of really good information, especially as you pointed out, as much survey research as we do. I will reiterate to everybody that we'll put this on our Wildlife Commission YouTube channel as quickly as possible, and I'll send out an announcement to that effect in just as timely a manner as I can as soon as it gets posted. And if you have any suggestions for future webinars, including ones that you would like to present yourself, just fire me off an email. I'm working on schedules. I've got a number of them, hopefully in the hopper, but I'm always looking for more ideas and more volunteers. So with that, we'll wrap it up. And again, thanks, Carrick, and everybody have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, my contact information is on this slide. If you ever have questions you're too shy to ask about right now, I'm happy to help you out. And
Perfect.
Chris Bova too.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Have a good one.